again, trying to pull a STEM topic into the STEM guitar course, this really has to be pared down. And to do this in 15 minutes is brutal. So what I've done is I've taken a handout that I created, and I'm going to admit right now, my assistant edited it, and she has a number she didn't change what she was supposed to. I'll point that out in the presentation. And so what I tried to do is, normally my students are designing and installing large systems, you know, 10 kilowatts on a house or 5 kilowatts at the local elementary school. What I did was I picked a small guitar amp here and tried to run through some numbers to give you an idea what it would take to make it solar powered. So solar powered electric guitar, there is no such thing, basically. Electricity is electricity. It comes from different sources. And solar power is just a source. Solar radiant energy, first law of thermodynamics, converting solar radiant energy into electrical energy. The solar is just the source. There's nothing special about a guitar being a solar guitar, other than you can take it to the beach and impress the girls or the guys and be out there for hours on end without having to plug into ComEd. Here's a problem we have with doing this, and this is a general problem with renewable energy at large, is that it's a variable source. And it's an intermittent source. And because it's intermittent and variable, this is why the U.S. Department of Energy is saying we have to start focusing on energy storage. And if you can understand the availability of the source you have, given the geographic location and the microclimate where you are, you can plan based on reasonable data for how much you're going to get over a longer period of time, and then you can store it for use on demand when you want and need it. And that's what this is kind of about. And of course you have to cover the photovoltaic effect. A lot of people don't know that the photovoltaic effect, this conversion of sunlight into electricity, was discovered by a 19-year-old French kid in France. Well, of course he was in France, he was French, named Becquerel. And I use a technique with my students called imaginative discovery. I like to go through the history of things, but I kind of really make stories up. You know, like, oh, you see, here's some of the stories I made up about Faraday. But anyway, my imaginative discovery with this guy is this. The first solar cell was a glass jar with two dissimilar metals and an electrolyte in there, and he was trying to build an electrochemical cell. And then he's in his room, you know, 19-year-old kid, don't bother me, Mom. Well, Mom comes in, and he's in there in this dark room playing around with this thing, and the drapes are shut, and what do all mothers say in a dark room? Turn on the lights, you're going to go blind. So she pulls the blinds open, the sun comes in, and whoa, the voltage goes up. And he's, holy cow. He closes them, and it goes back down. She opens them, it goes back up, and that's the discovery of the photovoltaic effect. And that's where it comes from. And a lot of people say, well, how do these things work? And my standard response is, it's frickin' magic. It changes sunlight into electricity. And you know, you can get into, this is a diode. Basically, this NP material, you know, you take a piece of 99.999% pure silicon crystal, you dope it, just like you have to dope Lance Armstrong to make him useful. You know, you put boron on the top, phosphorus on the bottom, the top becomes negative, the bottom becomes positive. You have a diode, the opposite of an LED. LED, you put electricity in, you get light out. Solar cell, you put light in, you get electricity out. It works just the opposite, the law of reversibility. So we can get into p-n junctions and depletion zones and all that stuff, and what a bunch of humbug, it's just magic. So, standalone power systems. 4 different modalities for putting solar photovoltaic technology to work. 1, direct power. Again, kind of impractical because of the intermittent and variable nature of the resource. However, very popular for livestock watering. People who do livestock watering, whenever the sun shines, they're pumping water, and they size it so that they have enough water on hand at any given time for the livestock. Another one, the most popular in this country, actually developed in the socialist mentality of Europe, is utility interactive, where we use the utility grid like a giant flywheel. We take what we need, we give back what we don't. And then in this country, good old Yankee independence, we started solar technology in this country with standalone battery-based solar PV systems. And in a nutshell, this is what's involved more for a residential scale system. You've got your photovoltaic module. It's not a solar panel. Solar panels turn sunlight into heat energy. Photovoltaic modules turn sunlight into electricity. National Electric Code insists on disconnect means and overcurrent protection everywhere. You're isolating all the individual pieces of equipment. This is important. Years ago, when I didn't know what I was doing, I solar powered my pop-up camper. And I had a photovoltaic module on the roof of the camper. I had a battery box in the back, and I didn't use any fuses. Who needs a stinking fuses? So anyway, I had drilled a hole through the bumper, and I put a rubber grommet there to bring the wiring from the battery into the camper, where I had a little inverter to make 120 volt. And over time, the grommet wore out, and then it wore through the insulation on the wires, and I had it dead short through my bumper on the battery. Now, where's all that smoke coming from? So fusing is important, and I didn't get into all those details here. You can't do that in 15 minutes. But the heart of a standalone system is the battery. Batteries are the weak link. They will not last very long. That thing right there, when you buy that, it's warranty for 25 years. Humbug. It is an heirloom you will pass on to your grandchildren. It has no moving parts. A battery, if it's treated gently and properly and cared for nicely, you can get 10, 15, 20 years out of them. If you don't, 6 months and it's dead. So it is the weak link, and you want to treat it nicely. To treat it nicely, you need a photovoltaic charge controller. The purpose of the photovoltaic charge controller is to prevent the battery from being overcharged. Two things you don't want to do with a battery. We use lead acid, that's the workhorse. You don't want to overcharge it, and you don't want to discharge it too deeply. If you overcharge it, you boil out the electrolyte. If you discharge it too deeply, you sulfate the plates. All that nice sulfuric acid, and you got lead over here and lead oxide over there, it turns into lead sulfate, and you just can't hardly get that off the plates again. So this prevents the overcharging. And then the other thing on the other side, you don't want to excessively discharge it, so oftentimes you're going to have something that says system monitor, but what I would be putting in there is a low voltage disconnect. So when the voltage indicates that the battery is getting too low, basically the lights go off. You protect your battery before you worry about having the lights on. And then you can stop there and have DC loads. For my camper, I had several DC loads in there, DC lighting. But in your guitar amp is 120 volts AC, but like with a lot of electronic power supplies, you get the power cord comes in, it goes through the switch, it goes through a fuse, and it goes to a transformer. And that transformer oftentimes goes to a rectifier. And heck, in a lot of electronics, what's a computer? It's got 12 volt DC, 5 volt DC. You know, you got 12 volts for the motors in there and 5 volts for the electronics. So I don't know, your amp might be stepped down to 12 volts DC to run the electronics. In that case, you could show students how to trace through the power supply and use the 12 volt battery right in there and have a DC amp. Otherwise, you need to get a device called an inverter, which inverts the 12 volt DC, nominal 12 volt DC, to 120 volts AC. Be careful of waveform. The cheapest ones are square wave inverters. When you look at voltage variation versus time, it goes like this. Now, down the road, Trace Engineering, they got real smart. They made what they called the modified sine wave. I call it the modified square wave. What they did was they chopped the corners off, and so it looks like the Olympic stairs where they get the award. It goes up like this and down like that. And that works better for electronics, but laser printers and things like that, it doesn't work very well at all. If you want to spend a lot of money on a residential size system, you're going to go to like Schneider Electric or Outback Power Systems, and they make what they call a true sine wave inverter. It's actually pulse width modulated, so it's got like 60 steps for every half wave, and it might as well be a pure sine wave. But for small things, like for a little amp like this, you're not going to find anything better than a modified sine wave. So, and it probably will work just fine with that modified sine wave. Now, the steps in figuring out how to size this thing, load analysis, battery sizing. You size the battery first. You're not making a solar guitar, you're making a battery-powered amplifier. And what the solar module is a battery charger that doesn't require the utility here. So after the battery is sized, then you size the array, then you select the charge controller, select your inverter, and then all your balance of system components, your switching, your overcurrent protection, and so forth. Now, the little thing I passed out takes you step by step through the process, and it looks kind of like this. I gave you this thing. There's like 5 or 6 steps to it. And what I've done is I've worked through a quick example problem. How am I doing on time?
4 minutes.
Oh, jeez, I gotta go fast. Okay, I selected the Fender Champion 20, a 20-watt amplifier. And it's affordable and it gets real high ratings. And I started filling out the numbers here. Basically, I just plug these numbers into the chart that you have right in front of you. The 20-watt amplifier. You got to make a scenario. How long a day are you going to play this? I said, well, I'm not going to play more than 2 hours at a time, and I'm only going to use it at the beach on the weekends, so I'm only going to use it 3 days a week. So I figure out my watt hours. How many watt hours a week am I going to use this? Well, that's my watts, that's my hours a day, that's my days per week, so 120 watt hours a week at 120 volts. Then what I have to do is I have to acknowledge I have inefficiencies in the system. So I derate, I multiply by 1.2. I really need to come up with, on the AC side, 144 watt hours. Now, I'm running off a nominal 12-volt battery. I want to get that converted into battery-type amp hours. And so what I'm doing is I'm dividing that watt hours by my battery voltage. I've got 12 amp hours a week that I'm using. And now divide that by 7, that tells me I have to have out of that battery 1.7 amp hours per day out of that nominal 12-volt battery. Then I start doing a few more adjustments here, and I'm starting to figure out, battery depth of discharge. When you go to Farm and Fleet or wherever and you buy a 100 amp hour trolling motor battery, baloney, it's not 100 amp hours, it's only 80. Because if you read the fine print, never take more than 80%. To be nice to your battery, you never take more than 50% out. So all of a sudden, my need for my 1.7 amp hours per day, that 3 up there is how many days of autonomy do I want? In other words, what if it's totally pitch dark for a certain number of days, but I still want to be able to play my 2 days? I need 3 days of battery autonomy. The number I made up, you can make it whatever you want. That gets my battery up to 5.1 amp hours of rated capacity. Then I'm only going to take half hour at a time. That gets me up to about 1.2 amp hours of rated capacity. This is a small battery. And now I have to correct for temperature, because the colder it is, the less effective storage it has. So I said, I'm not playing outside in the winter. I'm only doing spring to fall, so I picked 50 degrees as my coldest temperature. So now I multiply that 10.2 times my 1.19, and I say, well, I need a 12 amp hour battery. Well, the only battery I could find that was a decent deep cycle battery was an 18 amp hour battery. Well, that's more than I need. So I said, how many batteries do I need? I need 1 battery. So there's the battery I picked, and all this stuff I picked off of Amazon, and I put the prices and the descriptions and stuff right there if anybody wanted to try to reproduce this. I was up late last night. And next thing is, now I have to select the solar charging source, and that is totally dependent on the solar resource for your area. So since we're in Tulsa, I picked Tulsa. And I noticed that as an annual average over the course of the year, Tulsa gets what's called 6 peak sun hours of irradiance per day. Not enough time to talk about peak sun hours, but you can find maps like this, and it's all color-coded. This is based on decades of data that the U.S. Department of Energy has captured. And Tulsa is just a little bit north of Texas right there, right about 6 peak sun hours a day. So now I have to get down to, okay, that's how many peak sun hours I got. How much solar wattage do I need to fill that battery up in a day? So I go back to my original need, which is where the number correction is. It says right there, look on line 4 on the first page, is really line 3. My needed amp hours per day was the 1.7 amp hours per day I'm taking out with my amplifier. And I've got 6 peak sun hours per day. So what that means is that I only need to put in 0.28 amps into this thing. 3 minutes, okay, I only need to put in 0.28 amps. Well, I picked a small PV module, but guess what? It's oversized. It's 1/3 of an amp, so I only need one of these little modules, so I'm good. And there it is, right off of Amazon, $9.99. So with that $10 little solar module and that, I think the battery was
31.
Yeah, something like that.
So for
and then
$50.
Now I need to select my charge controller and inverter. I couldn't find anything small enough again. Morningstar, one of my best friends is the national tech support manager for Morningstar. and he knows his stuff, and he tells me, and I believe him, they make really good quality hardware. So I selected their smallest one. It's the SunGuard. Heck, it'll handle 4.5 amps. Well, we only need a third of an amp, so it's not going to blow up. And this thing, well, it's expensive. It's 35 bucks. And then, again, a cheap modified sine wave inverter. That guy right there is 19 bucks off of Amazon again. So, yeah, the price is up, and it's not free, but it's fun. And maybe Roger Fisher would want one of these to play at the beach. You might have, we can go with a bigger amp with the stuff that we've got here.
It's under 100 bucks.
That's how you do it.
Under 100 bucks without the amp.
That was 15 minutes, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. So there you have it.